Hello, everyone. I'm Stephan Chandler Garcia, a developer advocate at Salesforce. I was actually quite inspired by the welcome session this morning, sort of how we were learning about how people get into the Salesforce world, where they end up. And one of the really cool things and reasons that I found that I wanted to really speak at this event is that I'm actually from the Central Valley. So I was born and raised in Tulare, just about 45 minutes south of Fresno. Lived in Fresno before jetting off to the UK and living over in London for the last 8 years, and have now ended up in Vegas and now actually work for Salesforce as a developer advocate. Now I've been a customer, a partner, an ISV, and I feel very fortunate to have actually ended up here. And so I'm really glad to be able to give back. Hopefully there are a lot of you attending from the Central Valley. I think it's really cool that Salesforce has made its mark there because it's something you would have never heard of back when I lived there. So really looking forward to getting started with this session. And so it wouldn't be a session from a Salesforce speaker without our forward-looking statement. And so today, I'm going to be talking about a lot of new up-and-coming features of Salesforce, primarily for developers. So please ensure that you're making any purchasing decisions on our currently available products and not any of the future features and functionality that I'm going to be talking about today. And so today's session, like I said, is really all about the future of Salesforce development, what it actually means to be a Salesforce developer in 2021. And if I'm honest, I think there has never been a more exciting time to be a Salesforce developer. The amount of changes that have happened with this platform just over the last 3 or 4 years are incredible, whether that be through acquisition, through internal product innovation around the core platform. There's so much cool stuff going on and so many new ways that you can build awesome apps for your customers, for your employees, even just to use yourself. I know a lot of people will follow along with that and build apps for themselves to maintain their household, to manage their expenses. And so I'm going to be giving you a lot of my opinions today on what I think the future of Salesforce development is, what the future for that Salesforce developer is, and even who that Salesforce developer is. And to start out, I was going to take the session in a totally radical direction, say the future of Salesforce development actually doesn't have anything to do with Salesforce. It's really the future of development and how it impacts Salesforce. But the more I thought about it and the more I worked through the session and the demos, a lot of the content really does focus on how Salesforce and development really go hand in hand, regardless of the technology. And the way that Salesforce provides these features to you around our platform is really cool and makes a lot of things easier in the ways that we already know. I will be assuming that a lot of us have a little bit of Salesforce experience, not necessarily development experience, but I will be jumping forward with some of the key features of Salesforce and assuming that we already know that, but I'll try and provide background as we go through the session. So to get started, just a quick agenda of what we're going to do. I'm going to briefly touch on the Salesforce development landscape as it currently exists, and then talk about how we can apply that to create really connected experiences for our customers using our technology. And then we're going to look at some really key areas of Salesforce where we're making vast improvements and talk about some new features that are up and coming on the platform and maybe even demo a few of those. And those are going to be changes around the user interface and how Lightning has really impacted that and how Lightning Web Components have expanded through the last couple of years and going forward into the future. We're going to be talking about automation and some of the new process automation capabilities coming in the next couple of releases with Salesforce. And then one of my favorite topics that's up and coming is Salesforce Functions. We're going to go ahead and look at some functions code and talk about how functions can change the way that we develop on Salesforce. And then lastly, I will be checking out the chat during the session to see if there are any questions that are in context, but we'll save most of the Q&A for the end and go through how we can help you get answers to some of these hot questions as we can through the session. So let's go ahead and get that ready. Great. And so before I get started with the key content, I do have to point out that TrailheaDX is tomorrow. And some of the stuff that I'm talking about will be covered in much further depth at TrailheaDX. So I will be shouting out to some sessions that you might find interesting. based on the content that we're talking about today and point you in that direction for that information. So let's get started by talking about that Salesforce development landscape, where we exist and sit today as a Salesforce developer. And I really like to think that it fits into two parts. There's that Salesforce core functional knowledge that you need to really understand as a Salesforce developer. You need to understand objects and fields, how security works, the basics around page layouts, how they all work together with Lightning pages, Apex, SOCL, Salesforce DX. Like there's so much domain-specific information that you need to know and have at least a general understanding of to be a successful Salesforce developer. That's not saying that you need to know all of these things, but you need to know where to find these answers. Now, if you pair that with the wider development landscape, there are things that you need to understand around building CRUD applications, object-oriented programming. There are many different languages that you may know, like JavaScript, TypeScript, having a deep understanding of web components. By pairing these two things together around that core Salesforce knowledge and those development skills, you can find a really sort of good middle ground between a developer. But like I said a second ago, you do not need to know all of these things. But I think the future of Salesforce development and that landscape is really not necessarily bringing in a Salesforce developer to do work, but working together with other developers within your organizations, upskilling people around that Salesforce knowledge, as well as teaching people who have that core Salesforce foundational knowledge some of the development skills necessary to build apps on Salesforce. Because there are so many different aspects of the platform, these skills can be picked and chosen wherever to sort of meet the needs of the person that you need to develop your applications. Now, when we talk about that and translating that into those connected experiences, we're building mobile applications without actually building mobile apps. We're building Lightning pages. We're building communities and experience cloud sites to create those engaging experiences with our users, all the way through to using functions for high compute and building high intensity processes on the platform. And all of these things require pieces of skills from that skill set chart a second ago. For example, you don't need to know how to build front-end UI to build functions. However, you do need to know a little bit about Java or JavaScript. You may not have to be a designer to build Lightning web components because you can rely on the Lightning design system. You don't need to know Java to learn Apex. However, it will help you. And in the same sense, being an Apex developer will help you understand how to write Java functions. And so you can really start marrying these skills together to find and build that developer or that development team without actually having to go out and find someone who's been a Salesforce developer for 8 years or 10 years to come and work on your project. You can work together by teaching and understanding developers from outside the Salesforce ecosystem how Salesforce works and bring them together to build these experiences. Now, like I said, there are 3 areas we're going to be talking about today. The first of those is user interface. We're going to be talking about some of the up and coming changes to Lightning components and how they're going to impact your development and some of the cool new things coming. We're going to talk a little bit about automation and the flow orchestrator, and we're going to talk about functions. And we're going to put these into a real world connected process where we're going to capture some data with LWCs. We're going to use flow orchestrator to orchestrate a process. And then we're going to use functions to calculate a lease for a car. And we're going to do this by using the eCars sample application in the Trailhead sample gallery. It's a great app that brings together the best of Salesforce and the best of Heroku to build a progressive web app that you can deploy onto Heroku that communicates to Salesforce. It uses Kafka to send events from your connected vehicle into Salesforce. It uses Salesforce itself as the main user interface for interacting with your customer, etc. And it's all available online in the sample gallery. If you've never checked out the sample gallery, it is available at trailhead.salesforce.com/sample gallery. And we have all of these apps that we've created that you can easily go and deploy into your orgs. For example, the eCars sample app is just a mono repo hosted on GitHub with all of the apps. And just running through those steps themselves will help you deploy this application and allow you to interact with a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be demoing today on your own if you want to go ahead and check it out after the session. Now, looking at the app itself, just a little bit of architecture background so you can kind of understand the nuts and bolts that are happening as we talk through the demo. There's a custom car configurator here that's built using an LWC app that we're going to go through. And that's going to be sending data as a web app into Salesforce to create some leads. And once those leads have that car and that car configuration, you can also go in and see real-time diagnostics around the car that are just being brokered through an MQTT app, through Kafka, and then pushed into Salesforce for us to view from some live streaming data on platform. We're not going to talk as much about this part today. However, if you do go and download the eCars app and deploy that, you can check that out for yourself in the Salesforce org. And so let's go ahead and get started with our core content today. And that is around Lightning Web Components and how those user interfaces and changes can really impact the way that you're working with your users and some of the new features that we have coming for Salesforce developers. So if you're not familiar with Lightning Web Components, maybe you've dragged them onto a page, you've never built one, we're going to be talking about two different things today. We're going to be talking about LWCs and Lightning Web Components that run on the Salesforce platform. They use HTML templates to generate custom UI and interactions on the page using web component specifications. You're creating custom elements that can be used and rendered within components on the page, and it's utilizing the shadow DOM, which we should all be familiar with now because it really takes that encapsulation of the component and ensures that it's secure on the page when you have sensitive data coming in and out of that component, whether that be via events, via queries back to the UI, or back to the database. It's keeping everything secure. Now, on the other hand, we're going to be talking about the LWC Open Source framework that allows you to build apps using Lightning components outside of Salesforce. And it's a JavaScript framework that you can run or host anywhere, whether that be AWS, Heroku, anywhere that you can deploy your package, you can run the app. Okay. In the same sense, it utilizes HTML templates, custom elements, and the shadow DOM to create interactive experiences for your users in pretty much sort of the most modern way you can at the moment when it comes to web development. Now, if you're not familiar with the LWC open source project, like I said, it allows you to build web components anywhere, and it's incredibly fast. You can build really fast web apps with LWC OSS. It's totally standards-based. Everything is using ES6, HTML for creating your component bundles, and it's very easy to learn. Now, if you've written Lightning Web Components on platform for the Salesforce UI, you will not notice a difference when writing components in LWC OSS. The only change is in that scaffolding and actually deploying the application, where you have to do the work, whereas Salesforce obviously is already deployed for you. You can just write your components, drag them onto the page. In LWC OSS, you actually have to scaffold the application and host it yourself. You can't just write web components and magically make them appear. However, writing them is exactly the same as writing them on platform. If you want to get started with this or you'd like to learn more, you can check out lwc.dev to find out more information about the open source framework, or you could install the Create LWC app and just literally scaffold up an LWC application on your computer immediately in like a few seconds and get started. So going back to our connected experiences, we're going to start out today talking about this Pulsar Motors progressive web app that we've created that allows you to just build your own perfect e-car and then put in a request for it so that you can become an owner of that new car, even though we know there's a shortage and the delay is going to be like 6 months at the moment to get a new car because of there being no chips available. But we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. So let's go ahead and we're going to go in and demo that PWA and then take a look at some of the code that sits behind it. And so if I go over to my screen here, right here, I've hosted on Heroku currently our Pulsar Motors app here. Let's go ahead and refresh that page. We can start from scratch and build our perfect e-car. Okay, so here we have our PWA that's running Lightning components. And just to show you this in the inspector, if we go ahead and look at this component on the page and look at this next button, if you've written an LWC before, you can see here that we're literally just referencing our custom HTML template for a Lightning button. We've got our Lightning button here. We've given it a class. We've passed it some values. And we've been able to take this component and render it just like we would on platform. And so I'm going to go ahead and custom configure this car. I definitely want the long range one so I can take long road trips from Vegas down to Tulare. I can select my color. I kind of like the sleek black look on my cars. And then let's go ahead and go tan interior. Okay. From there, we're given just a summary of our car and a little lead capture form that we can use to capture someone's data so that we can reserve their car and contact them. So I'm just going to type in some details here. Victor wants this nice black Pulsar Motors car. It's the Pulsar 1 model. Okay, and let's go. Victor. We filled out our lead form. Let's go ahead and click on Contact Me. And what's just happened is we're actually using the Composite Graph API to send Salesforce that lead generation form, that person's data, their specific car configuration, and any details related to those objects in a single call that we can use to send that graph input directly to Salesforce and map all of those relational fields in that single transaction instead of having to continually call back to Salesforce to generate those relationships. It's just a great way that you can use to communicate with web applications through a single API call. And so we're going to go into our code real quick, and I just want to show you how similar this is to writing Lightning components in Salesforce. And so you can see here, we've got a couple of things. We have our template conditional rendering statement. So we've got our template if true, and we can use our getters and setters in our JavaScript to be able to conditionally render blocks of the component page. You can see here we have iterators, and so we can iterate over our exterior colors here. We've got our Lightning buttons that we're using to import those button components into the HTML. And really, we're writing Lightning components. However, they're not running inside of Salesforce. And I think this is a great way to be able to innovate and develop on platform. There's some really big and exciting projects that I can't talk to you about just yet coming live that have all been built using this framework. And it's incredible to see the scale that our customers are using to build apps and websites using Lightning components off platform. And it really means that you can bring some of your Salesforce development skills and resource into the outside world so that you're not just building Salesforce features and functionality using components. You can actually take those off platform and start building web apps using the skills that you've built writing Lightning components to build components for other websites. Now, going back into our slides, I want to talk to you about a couple of on-platform LWC features that are brand new to Salesforce. And the first of those I'm incredibly excited about. It just went live in the summer release, and those are LWC Quick Actions. Now, if I'm sure you've used a quick action in Salesforce before. You have your little quick action bar up at the top of your record page where you can put buttons, links, and actions, and you can put Aura components into that bar that you can launch in the window. Well, now you can use Lightning Web Components. However, there are lots of added bonuses to this functionality being available for LWCs. The first of those is that you can now use any Lightning Web Component as a screen action, and you can take your LWC and pop it up on the screen for your users to see. All you have to do is include that action type of screen action in your JS meta file to render that component. The second one of those is headless actions. Now, headless actions allow you to execute JavaScript in the browser from that action panel, and you can create a headless Lightning Web Component that is just a JavaScript file. There's no HTML template associated with that, and you can render that JavaScript and run it right in the page context. So we'll talk more about that in a second, but first off, on those screen actions, like I said, you can take any standard LWC and pop it up in your UI. Now, it's important to note that this component actually is being rendered with the page itself. So when that page loads, your component is being rendered. And so you have to be aware that there are special functions that you can use to call when you actually click the button and open the component. And we'll go through that in a minute, and I'm going to show you a little demo about it. But it's really cool because it allows you to build really customized UI elements that aren't always sitting on the page statically. And you can now use the actual action bar and those configurable dynamic actions to hide and show actions based on the criteria that you set. So you can have all kinds of really cool components just sitting in the background waiting to be rendered when a user needs those enhanced actions. Now, like I said, headless actions are super cool. I mean, it is JavaScript buttons reincarnated, anyone who's familiar with JavaScript buttons, but it runs in a safe and secure manner because we are running this JavaScript inside of the Locker service. And so it ensures that the transactions are being ran in a secure manner so that there can be no vulnerabilities exposed based on running the JavaScript in the page context. Whereas with JavaScript buttons, there were many vulnerabilities that you would have to protect from yourself. And so it's really cool because you can use all of the native LWC features like navigation, you can show toasts, you do all of that within this LWC headless action. So it's a really cool way to redirect users to different pages, update records in a different context that may be children of the parent, etc. There's loads of cool stuff you can do. I can't wait to see what everyone comes up with here. And like I said, it's important to note that the connected callback runs when the component is inserted into the DOM immediately on the page load. There is, however, an invoke function that you can call every time the button is clicked. So when someone clicks a button to launch the action, you can call the invoke function and then you can do something there. And so that way you can still run on that transaction specifically. And some of your more data intensive functions can happen in that invoke and not necessarily in that connected callback. So we're going to go ahead, pop back into our org for another demo. Okay. What I didn't show you a second ago was in here, if I go ahead and refresh my list view of leads, you can see here in a second, we have that record. So Victor's lead record has been pushed into Salesforce with those details we put in through the progressive web app. We can see here we've got a lead and his car configuration. And so here you can see that specific car that we just created and styled. We've got the details. And right here, we have our little action bar. And so I've created a locate action that we can use to locate a nearby vehicle. So when I click that, it's going to take a Lightning Web component and allow me to just pop it up on the screen and show me where there are nearby vehicles available. And so I can find out where I can go and buy my dream car straight from the app. And as a sales rep, I can let him know where they're available. Okay. In order to achieve this, like I said, I can go ahead into my JS meta file and I just put my target here as Lightning record action. I can then set that target config as Lightning _ record action and set the action type to screen action. And in my HTML, all you're seeing is a standard Lightning Web component. There's nothing special here. I've not had to write in this modal background. I've not had to write in the functionality for the close button. That's all provided by the Quick Action framework. I have, however, taken advantage of this new Lightning Quick Action panel based component that's available that gives us that panel that we can use. It gives us an area for a footer if we want to use a footer. In this case, I'm just referencing that Lightning map component directly in my LWC and exposing it as the quick action. And I was able to place that right on the record page to find those available vehicles. So it's really cool functionality. I'm sure everyone will be super excited. I've seen some great feedback so far, and keep it coming. You can check out more on the developer website around LWC Quick Actions. Now, the last thing, which is a sneak peek that you might have had at DreamTX, is around the next generation of Locker Service. Locker Service is currently being re-engineered to provide more speed, a better performance, and give you access to more of the DOM and the page through secure channels. Now, I can't give away a lot of information about this yet, but be sure to check out TDX as well tomorrow. And over the next sort of 12 months, we're going to be releasing more and more information about this next generation of Locker Service. It's worth noting that the new Lightning Web Runtime version of Communities is already taking advantage of some of this new Locker functionality. So be sure to check out some of those sessions tomorrow. And on that note, I'm going to point out what those are. So at TDX tomorrow, there are 2 sessions if you're interested in user interface and LWC enhancements. The first of those is the Salesforce Jamstack and how you can build Jamstack applications using Experience Cloud and LWC. It's going to be a great session, so please check that out if you're interested in some of those new Locker functionalities. If you're looking at building public-facing sites using Lightning Web Runtime and Experience Cloud. Now, the next one of those is an interactive demo that's going to be running tomorrow on Lightning Web Components with the product management and leadership there. And you can check that out. It's going to be repeated multiple times. So if you have a break in your schedule, go and check out that demo. And you can ask Q&A to some of the PM team there to learn more about the enhancements in those channels. Now, the next thing we're going to be talking about today is automation. And the big word on everyone's mouth really coming up into the next couple of releases is the Flow Orchestrator. Now, I'm a huge fan of Flow for building really cool wizards and user interfaces for your users. You can make really rich experiences pop with Lightning Web Components. and be able to manage and configure them and change them really easily without always having to go into the back end to modify a couple of lines of code here and there. You just pop into the UI and modify your flow. Now, Flow Orchestrator lets you take multiple screen flows and orchestrate them. So you can take a flow from one person, you can then pass it on to the next person, you can then pass it on to the next person. You can run all kinds of decision criteria and really pass that process along to multiple users. Now, instead of me showing you loads of slides about how that works and what it means, I'm actually going to demo Flow Orchestrator itself quickly. And so let's go ahead and pop back over into Salesforce and see what that looks like. So if I wanted to create a new orchestration, I create it just like a flow. I can go in and can select my templates. And down here, you can see I have Orchestrator here. So I can create up orchestrations that you can initiate yourself, or I can create a record triggered orchestration so that I can set up an orchestration using multiple flows that triggers on a record action. And so I'm going to go ahead, and I've already created one. That's a record triggered orchestration. And you can see here in the flow builder, I have a record triggered orchestration. This all should seem very familiar. I can start that flow when a record is created or updated, or both, or deleted. I can run the flow before save or after save. In this case, every time that car configuration is created, I'm going to go ahead and trigger my orchestration. And once it's saved, it's not urgent. So once the record's saved, we can then set up that orchestration and trigger it because it's not dependent on that in this case. And then I can select my object. In this demo, I've selected that car configuration object so that we can trigger a flow for actually locating the car. Now, as we step through here, you can see the first step in our orchestration and our stage. So our first stage here is to locate and acquire the vehicle. I have a flow here that I've selected. And if I go ahead and edit this, you can see here, I can choose when that flow is triggered. I can select when we can actually start working on that step and what the flow is. So in this dropdown, I can select from my entire list of flows. I can pass in input variables. I can then decide where the flow is going to be displayed. In this case, I want it to be displayed on that actual car configuration, and then I can assign it to a user. In this case, I've just assigned it to myself for the purposes of the demo. From there, I've actually put in a decision element here where I can say, okay, if a transfer is requested, this needs to be escalated to another person. And so if that's correct, then we're going to pass them down into another flow. And that's where you can see the second stage here, where if the transfer is requested, I have our transfer verification flow, and I've got another flow that has some context that we can pass information into. This should seem incredibly familiar if you're already writing flows in Salesforce, because it's the same builder, it's the same experience. However, you've got so much more power when it comes to actually putting these orchestrations together. And so let's go ahead. I've already activated it, and it's already been triggered. So I'm going to go back to my record here. Now, you can see here we have a LWC that's been dragged onto the page called the work guide. This is a standard component that's used to render those flows once they've been triggered in the orchestration. And so I've got my car locator screen flow. You can see a very familiar component because I've been able to reuse that same map component here in my flow. So I can go ahead and I can choose a car. I can see which and where I want to send it. Okay. I can show here multiple screens using Lightning Web Component. So I have a transfer request because this vehicle is nowhere near I live. I apparently live in Los Angeles, according to my contact record. And so there's a transfer fee incurred for this car. So I can go ahead and agree to those terms. And that means that that transfer has to be approved. Okay. So that request has now been submitted, and I can go ahead and finish the flow. What that's done is gone into the next stage of the work guide. The next assigned person now will receive a flow to actually complete the transfer request, and they'll get a notification for that. And you can see here as the next person in that step, again, is myself for the purposes of the demo, will now have a transfer request here so that they can go ahead and approve and press next and approve that transfer request. And in that way, we've been able to take two different flows and orchestrate them based on that record criteria and just magically pass them to the next person without having to do all kinds of programming on the back end to figure out which flow needs to be rendered, where are we going to render it, where are we going to assign it. And Orchestrator really takes care of all of that heavy lifting there for you. I think there's going to be some really cool stuff to come out of that, and really glad that everyone's going to start getting their hands on that functionality very soon. Now, if you have want to know more information or have any questions around some of this functionality, there are, again, 2 sessions that you should check out at TDX tomorrow. The first of those is the platform main show, and that's where we're going to go through a big super demo of anywhere that you can innovate with low-code solutions, including part of the Einstein Automate tools like MuleSoft Composer and Flow Orchestrator. Now, even cooler, as at 11 a.m., there's a Meet the Team session where you can actually go and meet the PMs of these products, the PM for Flow Orchestrator, the PMs for Flow, and ask them questions, get some insight from them, and really learn some great information around how they're building these products and what's coming next on the roadmap. So already done that demo. And now the last thing, and one of the things I'm most excited about, are Salesforce Functions. If you caught the Functions session at DreamTX last year, I'm going to talk about some of the same things today, but with a bit of new advancement on functions. Now, Salesforce Functions are really cool. They really bring that elastic scale that a lot of programmers are used to into Salesforce. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't use functions that were maybe on AWS before with Salesforce. However, they're now bound to the platform, and you can call them directly from Apex without having to call out to an API to run a function. And currently, they are available in JavaScript and Java. So if you have any JavaScript or Java programmers, writing a function will be like their everyday work. It's the exact same experience that you would have writing a function for any other platform. However, if you're a Salesforce developer on that side of things, like I said, you can now access them directly from Apex, synchronously or asynchronously. So you can call functions from Lightning Web Components, you can call functions from batch jobs, etc. And they're going to really bring out some really cool capabilities within Salesforce. They're super flexible. Like I said, you can program with them in multiple languages, and they're really going to solidify that high volume processing that you may need to use when building those connected experiences, like I've said before. And so, like I said, what's great about them is there's the elastic scale. Functions will automatically scale up and down for you so that they're ready to go on demand when needed. And they're available on platform. You can access them directly through Apex. It's super easy, and I'll show you some code in a second of where we do access them through Apex. And lastly, like I said, they can help you expand your talent pool. You don't necessarily need to rely on an Apex developer to do some crazy backflips, to do some high volume processing. You can bring in someone who has some JavaScript or Java experience to help you write that function and run it on platform. Now, do you always need functions? Maybe not. Maybe you do. So we've created this little diagram that we can use to sort of ask ourselves whether or not we should be writing something in a function or an Apex. And the number one decider is, do you actually need more processing power? Do you have a process that's falling over when writing an Apex? If the answer is yes, then go and write a function. Or if you're really pushing the limits, go and write a function. If not, keep it in Apex. We're not saying that you need to lift and shift all of that functionality. You can go ahead and bring all of that over into your core Apex. So in the same sense, whether or not the logic actually needs to run within that transaction itself. So if it's async, then you might as well just be able to throw it in a function. If it's not, then put it into that core Apex. But there's a lot to learn still as a developer, where you should be using functions, where you should be using Apex. And that's a road that we will all be crossing together as this feature slowly gets released in the soon time period that we can talk about, and you will learn more about tomorrow at TrailheaDX. And so let's go ahead. We're going to do a quick little demo on functions around a car leasing calculator. So we're going to start in code here first, and I have a function here. This function is just written in JavaScript. What's really cool about this is I've actually found a car lease calculator as an NPM package that's been open sourced. And so I can literally just install that car lease calculator into my function. From there, I can go ahead and take the payload that's been passed into the function that's been called. I can instantiate that lease calculator package and literally just calculate the lease using that package. This is an incredibly simple function. There's hardly any code here. And I've been able to go through and calculate a lease using this function just by grabbing a package off the internet and calculating it on the fly. You can see here in our lease calculator service, I'm passing in some parameters around the lease. So how much the car costs, what the APR is, what the down payment is. And I'm going ahead and serializing this payload, getting that lease calculator function and just invoking it. This is using an invocable method that can be accessed in a flow. And so I'm going ahead and just accessing this function through a flow. And so if we go back into the user interface here, you'll see here I have this calculate lease button. I can go ahead and calculate that lease. Okay, I can go ahead and say, we're going to give it to him for a little bit of a discount. Give it to him for $4,200 and say, let's say $6,000 down payment. We're going to do a 36-month lease. He's going to pay it off fast and let the flow calculate the rest. And when I press next, we've been able to really quickly call out to that function. Calculate that lease. So we've got a really high intensity calculation. We've been able to calculate it on the fly and show it to the users. And we can go ahead and just save that directly to the Salesforce record. Maybe we can create a quote. Maybe he can actually even sign the contract. And so it's just an example of how you can use functions to quickly go and grab some functionality off the internet, process a calculation that might be more compute intensive, and return it right to the UI just as if you never left Salesforce. That's because you haven't. The functions are running within that trusted barrier and that trusted wall around Salesforce. And so if you want to learn more about functions at TDX tomorrow, there's a great session on building scalable experiences using functions and the CLI, where you're going to learn a lot more information around what's coming around functions and when you can start getting your hands on them. And then lastly, there's a session, another Meet the Team session, just like the automation session, around platform. So go and meet some of the PMs who are building products like functions and the CLI and Salesforce DX, and ask them questions, learn more about the roadmap, and really get to know them through those sessions. I think those are going to be really exciting. So, like I said earlier, I'm a developer advocate at Salesforce. It's my job to create useful and great content for you, the Salesforce community. So if you want to learn more and find more of our latest resources, number one is developer.salesforce.com. That's where we post all of our podcast episodes, all of the latest blogs and information for consumption. If you want to be notified about that, you can follow at Salesforce Devs on Twitter, or even better, we've been putting a lot of resource and time into creating video content so that you can maybe take in bite-sized pieces of content. We do lots of live streaming every Thursday, and you can follow the Salesforce Developers channel on YouTube to be the first to know about that. Check out our videos and learn some more information there. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for the session. If you have any questions, please throw them in the Q&A, and we can get to those as they come through. Thank you very much. And so it looks like we have a couple of questions coming through. Perfect. And it looks like we have our first question through from the chat, and that is, when can I get access to Salesforce Functions? And this has probably been the most asked question of the last 12 months, really. And I'm going to keep the suspense here. And I'm going to suggest that you check out the TDX section on functions tomorrow to get the exact dates and information around where you can start to sign up for the beta. Great. The next question we've had come through is, can I host LWC OSS apps on AWS? And the question is yes. Anywhere that you can host that application, it's just a Node app that has Lightning Web Components installed. You can host that on AWS, on Heroku, wherever you host your apps as a business. You can throw your LWC applications, maybe even include them in existing projects to deploy them. Brilliant. Do we have any more questions? That's the last of them in the Q&A. Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone very much for attending the session. Like I said, check out Salesforce developers on Twitter or on YouTube. Or if you have any questions for me or follow-up for the session, you can always find me on stephan.garcia@salesforce.com via email or on Twitter @StephanWCG. Thank you very much.